Views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of Blue Ridge PBS, the Virginia Department of Education, or the Virginia Society for Technology in Education.
I'm Tom Landon. Join me as we travel to Atlee High School in Hanover County for a chat with Avanti Yamamoto, the 2025 Virginia Teacher of the Year, who shares her love of teaching and some strategies for engaging students. But first, a conversation with a teacher and student from Tallwood Elementary in Virginia Beach, who created a student-produced podcast helping military kids and their families adjust to deployment and reintegration, the sometimes difficult time when service members return home to their families. That's coming up next on Activated Learning.
Blue Ridge PBS, in partnership with the Virginia Department of Education and in collaboration with VSTE, the Virginia Society for Technology in Education, is talking to leading educators about what gets them energized and how technology is being used to inspire student engagement. This is Activated Learning.
You have to see every kid as capable. And when you start to believe that, it comes out in your actions. And those actions convince students that they are capable. And that's the real key there.
We asked each other questions and we each had a turn to answer. And one of the questions was, what was the hard thing about reintegration? And what was the positive thing? And what was your experience? And all that stuff really grouped together and made the wonderful podcast. And then we ended up winning first place overall for citywide.
We're here at VSTE at Virginia Beach in 2024, and I was walking through the exhibit hall, and I saw that there was a group of students there talking about their work with podcasts, and I thought, what a perfect group to come in and do one of our short interviews. So I'm joined by Jeanne Dodd and Scarlett Coakley from Virginia Beach Schools.
Hi there. Hi.
We're so glad to have you. And I'm going to start with you, Jeanne. You are sort of the sponsor for this podcast project, is that right?
I am.
And how did that come about that you thought that was a good thing to be doing?
Well, they were a group of students in their school. They happened to be working with the military. We also happened to be having a digital citizenship contest and thought they were the perfect group to kind of put their ideas and how they felt, their ideas about being in the military, because we are a military town, Norfolk, Virginia, with a Norfolk Naval Base.
Yeah.
And so there are topics that they wanted to get out to everyone. This one happened to be about reintegration.
Yeah, and that's the thing we forget about.
Right.
Your parents are in the military, but you're also kind of in the military, aren't you, Scarlett?
Yeah. But we wanted to talk about reintegration because it's the concept that
And I'm going to ring my buzzword bell right now, which is what I ring when I'm not sure what something means.
Oh.
So
Okay.
What is reintegration?
So reintegration is when a family member goes on deployment or geobaching, which I can explain later. But so that's when they come back from geobaching or deployment, and so that's the process of reintegration is seeing your family member again that was deployed or geobached.
Right. And when you come back, it's not always easy to come back to school.
Yeah,
right?
it's not always easy that much.
And that is something that we always think, being in a military town, that you think, oh, their parents will come back, their family's going to be fine, everyone's happy. But that's not always the case, in which people never really think about that, what happens after they come back.
So tell me about the podcast project. What did that mean for you? What did you have to do?
It was really special, and so the whole entire process is that we got pulled out of class, and my military counselor introduced to us that that we could do this military podcast for the competition, and we got this paper, and we organized everything in this paper.
So this kind of tells you what your plan is for a podcast. This is a great little document. At the top, it says what's your topic, and then who's going to do it, and who's your audience, which is a really important question.
Yep.
What's your atmosphere? I like that question a lot. Is it a dark atmosphere?
This is a sheet I give all my kids whenever we do a podcast, just so that they can plan, not necessarily to script it, but to get their ideas of what they're going to do. And I always tell them, if you get to the first topic and it's just natural conversation, just stay on that topic.
Stay on that topic.
Stay on that topipic and keep going. And then we love to put in the mood.
I love that. What is your mood? We have one for this podcast. It's sort of positive and, upbeat. And And then I like that you include things like, in addition to the questions, it's like, make sure you thank your guests at the end, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Good closing.
Yep. And so we went to the podcast room, and it took us a couple of tries to, get into the flow. And so me, my friend Michelle, Layla, and all of us, we just grouped together and worked together and made this podcast. And so we asked each other questions, and we each had a turn to answer. And like one of the questions was, what was the hard thing about reintegration? And what was the positive thing? And what was your experience? And all that stuff really grouped together and made the wonderful podcast. And then we ended up winning first place overall for citywide.
That's fantastic. And through doing this, you probably thought at the beginning that you knew about reintegration already because you'd
Yeah.
experienced, but did you find in the process of doing a podcast about it that you learned things too?
Yeah, because it was hard for me when my dad came back from geobaching, and because he was stationed in Connecticut for 4 years. And it was hard for me because he hasn't lived with us in 4 years, and he would only visit a couple of times. And so it was weird because it was just weird having him home there all the time when I was usually used to him being here for 3 days and going back to Connecticut, then coming back 2 weeks later. And just this.
Scarlett, do you want to tell them what geobaching is?
Oh, yes.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna ring the bell now because I like to ring the bell
Geobaching.
whenever I can. Geobaching.
So geobaching is when it's like deployment, which I can also explain, but geobaching is when a family member gets stationed in a different state or even country, and they can sometimes get stationed there for years or months.
And the family stays behind.
Yeah.
They stay in the
So
same.
that's not when your family.
Right.
And we see this just occurs to me, like we see so many videos of like mom or dad comes back and there's a school assembly and there's like this tearful reunion.
We've had a couple of those.
Yeah.
But that doesn't. You never know what happens
Right.
like when they go home. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's probably not easy, right?
Yeah, and that's the part that most people don't really see. They don't really see the family members coming home, and they don't really show the hard parts of it. But there is always that happy part, seeing them come home, but there's always that hard part of getting back into the flow of them being there.
Right, because we all have routines, right?
Yeah.
And that was one of the big words that they were talking about was routines, is that so the parents don't know the routines, and whoever the parent was that stayed behind, them having a hard time, they had everything.
They had to
under
be both
control.
parents, and now
Yes.
they're not. Yeah.
And now you have someone else trying to come in, and she's like, "Hey, I've got
It's
this."
such a
Yeah.
it's such a big question for kids to think and
yeah.
talk about. Jeanne, are there things that you think because it was a podcast that made it more valuable for these kids?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, one of the things, they didn't realize it until this year, but the military family life counselors, they used that podcast. So they sent it to all of their military family counselors so that they could let the parents know, because a lot of them, they didn't know the kids' perspective as far
Yeah.
as, and that's what I love about it, was it elevated their voices.
And it becomes a document that could be used for a long time,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so it was a lot helpful.
So now you've gone on to middle school.
Mhm.
Are you looking for or finding any opportunities to do more podcasts?
I mean, I haven't been introduced with any yet, but I think at my old school there was more opportunities to talk about and elevate your voice about it. And at my new school there isn't really that many opportunities, but I think if I looked into it I could probably find something.
And it could be teachers that aren't
Yeah.
comfortable yet.
Sure.
Yeah.
doing
And
that.
but I think, a note to our school administrators out there and our coaches and ITRTs in schools that might think about what is it about. I love the fact that this project was so specific to your school and your students and what they were experiencing. It wasn't just a history podcast. It
Right.
was a podcast about the kids and their experiences.
Yeah.
And Scarlett actually got the chance. So she ended our podcast, but she also got to do a little bit of the editing,
Yeah.
which I loved on We Video.
Mm.
So she did some of that. What did you add to it?
I added music to make it more like heartfelt, or like to match the vibe, and just to make it more pop. It makes it more pop out to people, and just to make it round together. And then at the end I did like a little thing saying thank you for watching the podcast or listening to the podcast, and just thank you for your time.
That's great. And what software? What
So
applications?
we were
What
using
equipment do you use?
we used WeVideo, and at the time they used the Roadcaster podcasting system,
Yeah.
but we had moved it to WeVideo so that they could edit
Great,
as
great.
well.
Well,
Yeah.
I could talk to you guys forever. I love this idea, and I hope that other schools are listening, watching to this, and trying to think of what is it about our school what could we have our kids do a podcast for. So thanks for joining me on
Thank
Activated
you for
Learning.
having us.
Thank you for having us.
This is Activated Learning.
We think that our students and our children right now know how to navigate technology because it's everywhere.
Because we
But
see them in
they're
Walmart
always
in the
using
grocery
it.
cart, with their iPad in front
We
of
have
them.
the iPad kids, but when you want them to use them for a certain purpose, it has to be taught. And so it all came down to teaching our students how to use those tools in a meaningful way.
Subscribe to the podcast on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Blue Ridge PBS Echo TV.
Hopefully that conversation gets you thinking about what issues are particular to your community and how a podcast of your own might lead to learning both in and outside of your classroom. Next, my conversation with Avanti Yamamoto of Atlee High School, the 2025 Virginia Teacher of the Year.
The Virginia Teacher of the Year is Miss Avanti Yamamoto from Region 1.
I'm so incredibly honored. I'm so honored. I'm so grateful to work in a great school, a great county, and a great state. I'm so grateful to be supported by such an amazing support system, my husband, my family, my math coach, my principal, my superintendent, everybody that just allows teachers to be creative and have the ability to say, these are my students, these are where they're at, and this is what they need, and giving us the ability to teach them the best that we know how.
Avanti Yamamoto, welcome to Activated Learning.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are the 2025 Virginia Teacher of the Year, a big honor, and I am so happy to be here at Atlee High School with you, but I just want to know, what led you to becoming a teacher?
Yeah, so I actually went to school with the intention of becoming a doctor. But in my third year of college, I had an amazing math professor, Dr. Craig Larson, who found this passion for teaching that I didn't even know that I had. And he encouraged me to become a math teacher. So I applied to our teacher prep program, and I was rejected, actually. And I was so devastated. So I decided to go try to be a doctor. And I worked in the ER, and I took my MCATs. I did everything except for actually apply to med school because I couldn't do it. I knew that just
Well, it's
wasn't what
good
I
when you
wanted to
realize
do.
that's such a big
Yes,
commitment,
good
right?
thing I figured that out pretty early. And then it was actually my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, who was like, you know what, you should just go do it anyways. Just go be a teacher anyway. And so I got a provisional license, and I started working in Richmond City Public Schools. And then after 2 years, I'm at Hanover County Public Schools at Atlee High School, and I've been here ever since. And it's just been so incredible, such an amazing journey. So everything I have learned about teaching is through professional learning. So I'm so passionate about professional learning, I think because of that, because that's really what's shaped me into the teacher that I am.
And we'll get to what you think makes good professional learning, because there's so many different examples of it out there in the world.
Yeah.
But you've mentioned your college professor. Were there any other teachers in your past, in your high school years or anything else who just, you thought even though you weren't thinking of being a teacher, somebody who impacted you personally besides your college professor?
Yeah, I had just really great math teachers in high school. I remember they were just some really amazing people. I had Mr. Barr, who was my geometry teacher, and he was so lively, and he just engaged with his students in this really incredible way. And I had Miss Harris for Algebra 2 and for calculus. She was amazing too. And then Miss Simpson for pre-calculus, and she was also my Key Club advisor, and now I'm a Key Club advisor here at Atlee. And yeah, you never forget these amazing teachers that had such a great impact on you. And, I hope that in the future my kids remember me
Oh, I'm sure
the
they
way
will.
that
I'm
I
sure they
remember
will.
them.
And I think sometimes those of us who are in education or have been, we recognize that sometimes the general public doesn't think of teaching is a noble profession and all that, but maybe not where we send our best and brightest. And you're clearly one of those people who's very bright and very intelligent, and you had a lot of options. So, what do you think about that idea that teaching, I think, should be one of the greatest professions anybody can
I
aspire
agree.
to.
And I believe that it is. I believe that I am in the STEM field, right? I create STEM people, right? Like, I am their first exposure, and I create this STEM math identity for students. And I take that very, very seriously. There is no STEM profession without their teacher first.
And you teach more. I don't know what all you're teaching. Maybe you just talk about that. What classes are you teaching right now?
I teach pre-calculus, and I teach IB math applications and interpretations. But I've also taught Algebra 2. I've taught SPED, collaborative courses, Algebra 1. I've taught a wide range of things over the years, but right now I teach pre-calc in the IB math class.
So I was a social studies teacher, but I know, and I was a math phobic student myself. Somehow in my head, I got it that math wasn't my thing. And I was bad at it, although I had a bad stretch in algebra, the end of Algebra 2, I guess. But when you're teaching kids pre-calc, for example, and you're looking at this idea that not just kids who go into STEM, we're all going into STEM in one way or another, right? Mm-hmm. I've seen some video of you teaching in your classroom. You're very enthusiastic. Your kids seem excited about it. When you find those kids who are maybe bright kids, but they're just like, they have this thing about math, how can you help?
Well, first, let me start by saying you are a math person. You are absolutely a math person. And I have I love teaching the students who come to me math phobic, as you said, with that. And one of the first things that we work on is creating this positive math identity and this idea that you are capable, you can do it. And I think a lot of it stems from our teaching practices of math. And I think it's important. Whenever you teach something, you have to teach the conceptual understanding and not the procedural understanding. So what I mean by that is you have to understand why math works the way that it does, because so often students think that math is just supposed to make sense, but they have to make sense of it. And my job as their teacher is I'm not an information teller. I'm a knowledge facilitator. So I have to be providing them with the opportunities to make sense of the math. And that's how I try to present math concepts. I also recognize that I teach abstract math, right? And so when are we ever going to use this thing? Exactly. And I think that contributes a lot to students losing their math identity because they no longer see themselves in the math. And so I focus a lot on real world applications. I do a lot of projects, and I always try to connect it back to the real world. And I give them these projects where they can go out and they can take the math we learn in the classroom and apply it to something in the real world that they are interested in. So if I'm teaching about exponential functions, I've had a student who went out and researched the exponential of increase in three-pointers in the NBA after Steph Curry started playing in the NBA, right? So he doesn't see himself in solving exponential equations, expanding and condensing logs, but he can see himself in basketball. He loves basketball, right? And so that's how you create this positive math identity, is when you create these opportunities for students to see themselves in math, then you turn math students into advocates, right? Like I had a student who compared GDP to literacy rates, and she's looking at real world data, and she sees that there's a correlation. So now when she's looking at her Pearson's correlation coefficient, she's seeing that, R equals 0.85. That actually means something. There is a positive correlation between them. So now we should do something about it.
Right. And that's so important. I mean, I taught human geography for a long time, and a lot of it was data. And they're like, I didn't know I was going to be, doing graphs and
Right,
comparative analysis of things like that's what demographers do.
Yes.
That's what happens.
And that's the coolest thing, in my opinion, about teaching math is that I don't teach math, I teach the world. Math is applied to every single content, everything. It's the entire world. So if you can see math, if you can see the world through the lens of math, you see a totally different world.
Yeah. You've talked in other interviews about the importance of kind of setting expectations. We've kind of touched on that with sort of the math phobia kind of thing. But how do you help students think that, they can do as much work as anybody else could or can understand things that maybe they didn't think they could?
Yeah, you just have to believe in them. And that it starts with your belief structure. You have to see every kid as capable. And when you start to believe that, it comes out in your actions. And those actions convince students that they are capable. And that's the real key there, is because I can believe it all day long, but I need you as the student to believe that. And students really believe their teachers, they're like, wow, she really thinks that I can do it. I think I can do it. And then they try and they're like, wow, I can do it. And, it's competence breeds confidence. And so the more successful they are, the more confident they are. And that breeds that self-efficacy. I also do a lot of things that try to relieve math anxiety in my class. So all of my quizzes, for example, they're all open note quizzes, and they're all notes that my students have created themselves in graphic organizer to help them outline their ideas. So they're not my notes, but they've created them themselves. And we know as educators, things like open note quizzes don't necessarily if a kid doesn't know the material, having the notes out there isn't going to magically, but those are the things that relieve the math anxiety from them. And I think it's really important to be aware as a math educator that you have students who come into your classroom with that sense of anxiety.
Well, and not only that, but I decry I don't think all students are graduating now knowing how to take their own notes.
Oh, yes.
And
absolutely.
I remember that the most valuable things I learned in school were how to research, how to take notes, and that makes everything else, how to do an outline,
right.
All of those things. That's how I start everything I do now, with the same outline formula that Ms. Thompson taught me in 10th grade.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. It's so true. It's one of the most frustrating things that I used to feel was when I'd be like, okay, but where are your notes? And then students would be like, well, my notes don't help me. And I'd be like, how can you say that? We spent 45 minutes doing them. And I'm like, of course they don't help.
And they can
They're
draw
not your notes.
I remember a check plus system that I used in college where when something was really important, I'm taking the notes, but then every now and then I'm like, I'm circling things and I'm checking them and I'm highlighting them, and nobody else would have thought to do that. Nobody else knows what my language gaps were, my knowledge gaps were.
Yeah. So now I don't have, my kids don't take my notes, they take their notes. And now they have an ownership of them. They know where everything is, and they're color coded, and they have their own system, and it's really beautiful. And that's
whatever works for you, because all of our brains are different.
Exactly.
You mentioned in one of your interviews that your parents are very proud of you for what you've done as a teacher. I have seen, again, going back to what we were talking about before, parents who are trying to help their kids think about what they want to study in college, whatever, sort of denigrating the idea, don't you want to be a lawyer? Don't you want to be a doctor? Kind of thing. Have you caught your parents saying nice things about you to other people and that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, they're really proud of me. So I am from a very rural village in India called Mantini. And so
what part of India?
It's South India.
Okay.
It's near Hyderabad.
Okay.
And so my dad is very connected to our community, and he has brought me back, and we've been doing these webinars with all of the teachers in Mantini, India. And I've never felt so connected to where I've come from. I was born in America, but
Right.
my parents, my heritage, I'm 100% Indian. And And I feel so connected to that community through this. And so we've done these webinars and they'll ask me questions. What is education like? What advice do you have for us? How can we change our education practices, our teaching practices in India? And, we have a lot of access to incredible professional learning in America that, we don't have in my village in India.
Right.
And so it's been this amazing opportunity that, for me to give back to a community that I came from. So that's been really incredible.
Well, and we started this conversation talking a little bit about the influence of professional learning on you, as someone who came in as a provisional teacher. And tell me what you think works. How does that work best when we're trying to give teachers new ideas and help them with classroom practices and content and everything else?
Yeah. So I think professional learning isn't necessarily about learning new things. It's not just about that. It's also about reinvigorating your excitement and your love and joy for the practice. And there's just nothing more exciting than getting this new idea and then just putting it into action in your classroom and watching your students just light up, with understanding. I think professional learning is the most effective, though, if it applies to things that we want to grow in. I don't think an overarching professional learning, there's no single professional learning experience that could apply to every single teacher, right? So I have an idea of where I want to grow in my practice. I should be able to go to that professional learning conference or book study or workshop, whatever it is. I should have that flexibility, which is why I really love what Hanover County does. And we have 14 hours of flexible professional learning that we can do in any capacity that we want to. So if I want to do a book study, I can spend my 14 hours reading this book, working with other teachers in my county and talking to them about it and growing in my practice. And so a couple of years ago, for example, I did a book study on building thinking classrooms, and that transformed my practice like nothing else ever has. And that's how I learned how to move my practice from procedure and mimicry to conceptual understanding and building thinking within my teaching practices. I also got my national board certification, which was the single greatest professional learning experience of my career. That helped me become this more reflective practitioner. But I think it's very important that the professional learning, it has to apply to what you are interested in growing in.
In your classroom, I noticed again from some of the video I've seen and from articles about you, your kids are not sitting in their chairs.
That's right.
Much. They're up. And what's the importance of that? I'm a math teacher. I have to teach them. We're going to do these problems.
Yeah.
But instead, your kids are up and they're writing and they're talking. And I can imagine it's a fairly active and a little loud in the classroom.
Yes.
What's the method behind that then?
Yeah, so that actually came from building thinking classrooms. And so it's a book by Peter Liljedahl, which is incredible. I encourage every math educator to read this book. And it talks about, he's done decades of research about how our math practice has been focused on procedure and mimicry. You show them this practice and then they go and they try it a million times and all they're really doing is mimicking what the teacher's doing. There's no actual thinking happening in our classrooms. And so what they're doing at the boards, what my students do at the boards, is I give them thin slicing. So I access some prior knowledge and then I build on it. So they can do x plus 3 = 5, right? But now what if I changed it slightly and I just built on it a little bit? What if I said 2x plus 3 = 5? And they're thinking through, how would that now change the problem, right? Or if you just want to teach basic equations, here's a box plus 3 = 5. What goes in the box, right? So you're just thinking through, you're turning math into thinking versus a procedure. And so students are making those connections together at the boards in groups of 3, and it's all vertical, non-permanent spaces. That's really important because you need to give students this space to think. And collaborate and work together. And so they make all these connections. And the only thing that I do at the very end, I say only, but it's very important.
Let's not minimize your role in the classroom.
I consolidate at the very end. I'll consolidate all of the thoughts that we had. So this thing that you did on your own, by the way, that's called the one-to-one property. So I'll formalize definitions for them, things like that. And so my notes that I really do really only take maybe 20 minutes, 15 minutes, versus in the past, it would be like 45 minutes of notes and they're just listening to me talk, right? And so they're not
listening, right? Because you're giving them so many opportunities to drift away and think about things that are also going on in their lives,
right.
Whatever. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
What do you want people to know about teaching? It's a big question.
There is no profession like it. It is just the most amazing adventure. I love it. I mean, nobody gets anywhere without a teacher. Nobody becomes a scientist, a journalist, a doctor without a teacher, right? And it has this ripple effect. You just never know where your impact is going to land. Years later, a student reaches out to you and they say, Miss Y, thanks for never giving up on me. You taught me math, but you also taught me how to think critically, how to problem solve. And because you never gave up on me, now I'm a lawyer. Now I am a doctor. Now I am studying mechanical engineering at VMI, right? And it's just so incredible. When you're in it, it feels sometimes like you have these challenging moments, but then in like a year, it's like evolved into something totally different. And the impact that you make, it's just not like anything else. And it's just the most incredible job there is. It doesn't feel like work to me. I wake up in the morning and I get so excited that I get to see my students that day. And I just look forward to it all the time. I mean,
that's great. And I hope, it's so nice to see that enthusiasm. And, not all teachers have it. Many do. What do you do when you're not at school to kind of take care of yourself, to unplug from school, or do you?
Well, I have a daughter. She's going to be 4 in May. I can't believe it. So, I mean, I play with her and, spend time with her. I love to read. I also have a blog. It's called Beyond the Bell. And I share a lot of teacher stories on there. I talk about a lot of different things about teaching practices. So I love.
We would encourage you to find that blog, and we'll put it up on the screen so you can go there and find it.
Yeah. So I mean, right now when I'm not in the classroom, I'm traveling around the state and I'm speaking a lot at different things. I'm doing workshops and speaking at colleges and universities. It's been really incredible.
And that's something that comes with being the 2025 Virginia Teacher of the Year. Is that, I know that you, like almost everybody I've ever met who's won a teaching award, that's not why you do it, right? But what does it mean to be recognized, and what is the responsibility behind being recognized as Teacher of the Year?
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, yeah, my math coach is the one that nominated me, which is crazy because I am only the teacher I am because of her. And when I first was recognized, I do see it as a reflection of every student I've ever taught. Because my students are my greatest teachers, and that's really who this recognition feels like. It's really for them. It's really for every child I've ever taught. All of my mentors and my math coach, everybody that's taught me how to be the teacher that I am. That's really who I saw was that. And then this opportunity to give back to the teaching community and just do whatever I can to lift other teachers up and advocate anything I can do. The responsibilities are, I mean, I just never expected this to come of that, right? Like it's been like a year and a half, I guess, since I first started, when I first got nominated. And I just never thought that the journey would bring me here. And it's been so incredible. And I'm now part of a national cohort of all of the state and territorial teachers of the year in the entire country. And we have this like giant network now of these teachers who just want to better education in this country. And it's just been so incredible.
That's great. Last little topic I want to talk about a little bit is technology, because we've touched on it a couple times. What role does technology play in your classroom, and how does it make things easier? Where are there places where it doesn't make sense? But also, what are you using in your classroom? Is there anything fun, any fun toys, tools?
Oh, yeah. I love technology. I think technology is how you bring your content to life in ways that were unimaginable many years ago. Like I said, I teach abstract math. And so I use technology to bring my content into the concrete. So when I teach right triangle trigonometry, when I'm teaching angles of elevation and depression, instead of giving them an arbitrary worksheet, I'll have them use Google Earth. And they can use the ruler tool, and they can use the actual distance and the altitude to calculate the real world angle of depression. So I've had students research the Neuschwanstein Castle. And
now we haven't used the buzzword bell yet, so I'm just gonna. I'm always itching to ring it. So, what is the Neuschwanstein Castle? I don't know that.
It's a castle. It's a castle in Europe. And the king wanted to sit tall and look over all of his loyal subjects. So it was high up on this hill. It's actually the castle that Cinderella's castle was modeled after. Okay. And so it ended up actually becoming a lookout point during World War II because it had this high elevation. And so I had students calculate the angle of depression, see how far out they were able to see during World War II. But it's the actual angle, right? Because they're using Google Earth. So that's one of my favorite uses of technology is Google Earth. I also have them pull real world data when we do statistics. And I have them calculate for exponential growth and decay models, when they calculate their sinusoidal models, they're using real world data to do that. And the only reason they have access to that is because of technology. They have all of these databases that they have at their fingertips. It's not arbitrary data that I made up and I put on a worksheet. It's stuff that they can actually go out and research. And they have this ability to do it on anything that they are interested in. So that's how they get to see themselves as these mathematicians. So I think technology is incredibly important. And I think we should embrace it in our classrooms as much as we possibly can. And when you integrate technology in your classroom, you're really showing students that learning is limitless. And I think that's so powerful.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we could talk forever, but the podcast only goes so long. So I'm going to let you get back to your classroom. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. For Activated Learning, I'm Tom Landon.
Activated Learning is produced by Blue Ridge PBS in partnership with the Virginia Department of Education
and in collaboration with VSTE, the Virginia Society for Technology and Education.
This podcast is hosted and produced by Tom Landon, Director of Educational Innovation,
with lots of help from graphic and audio designer Jay Prater.
Additional support provided by Andy Depew in our podcast studio.
Our Vice President of Education is Dr. Rose Martin.
Special thanks to Calypso Gilstrap, Associate Director of the Office of Educational Technology and Classroom Innovation
at the Virginia Department of Education.
Our credits are read by students at Westside and Highland Park Elementary Schools in Roanoke, Virginia. If you like what you hear, subscribe to Activated Learning wherever you get your podcasts.
Or watch the Echo channel at blueridgepbs.org.